Good morning. My name is Yoram Cohen. I'm the director of the UCLA Eunice and Sarai's Nazarian Center for Israel Studies. And on behalf of UCLA, our faculty, staff, and the wonderful benefactors and steadfast supporters of our center, Eunice and Sarai's Nazarian, and our Center Community Advisory Board, and its chair, who unfortunately could not be here today, Sharon Nazarian. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Israeli-American Exchanges. And this is the Center 6 Israel in 3D conference, presenting the many different dimensions of Israel. And for those of you who may be new to our center is an academic center. It's an interdisciplinary center at UCLA, which promotes a study of history, society, and culture of the modern state of Israel. And we do that through conferences, we do that through talk series, visiting scholars program, research program, and of course also an undergraduate minor in Israel studies. Now, today's conference is part of our continuing mission to reach beyond the UCLA campus and bring informed and substantive discussion of Israel to the broader Los Angeles community and around the world. The topic of our conference is timely, particularly during these difficult times of hostilities in the Middle East and Israel's borders, and difficult times to the Jewish nation around the world. In the U.S., and even here in California, we have not been immune to acts of hatred. I truly hope that the conference today will bring all of us a measure of comfort by exploring the positive connections and contacts between Israel and America and what each culture can learn from the other in the areas of religion, business and technology, and entertainment, all which you will hear about today. So I would like to thank all of our wonderful speakers and moderators who came both from Israel and from across the U.S. and have come to share their knowledge and expertise with all of us. We look forward to a fascinating series of discussions here today. And next, I'd like to express our appreciation and thanks to our generous conference sponsors. First and foremost, our premier sponsor, the Jewish Community Foundation of Los Angeles, as well as our session sponsor, the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation, and media sponsor, the Jewish Journal of the Greater Los Angeles. And to community partners of this conference, Sinai Temple, Israel Center, the Westwood Village Synagogue, and the Sephardic Educational Center, and Hillel at UCLA. And to our community partners in here, we are obviously very much grateful, as we are to the many individuals that have helped to put this event together, including especially the Conference Advisory Committee and the Center dedicated staff. This would have not been possible without the hard work and labor of love by our Deputy Director, Maura Resnick. Maura, where are you? And of course, Jack Schweda and Melody Wang of our center staff. And thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule on a beautiful Sunday here in LA to be with us and to learn and to be inspired by our speakers. So now, let's get right to it. I'd like to welcome Nazarian board member Abner Goldstein, who will introduce our first panel. Abner?
Yoram, thank you very much, and good morning to you all. I have the special opportunity this morning of introducing our distinguished moderator of the first of our very interesting panels in the 2019 Nazarian Center Israel in 3D Conference. Did I do that? The members of this panel will focus on the current status of Jewish religion in Israel and the significance of this issue to our own Jewish community. We are very privileged today to have as the moderator of this panel Dr. Josh Holo, Dean of the Los Angeles campus of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion and Associate Professor of History. HUC-JIR with campuses, 3 campuses in the United States and one beautiful one in Jerusalem, play an important role in creating future leaders in the Jewish community by ordaining Reform rabbis, by training cantors, educators, and nonprofit professionals, and in creating an environment for serious scholarship. Just a bit on Dr. Holo's own background. Dr. Holo was director of the HUC-JIR School of Leichtag School of Judaic Studies. The Leichtag School serves as the undergraduate Jewish Studies program at USC, an academic partner in HUC. Dr. Holo is the editor of the Brill series on Jewish Studies, a contributor of Torah commentary, and a writer and thought leader on liberal Zionism. His recent article entitled Peering into the Nationalist Mirror appeared in the Fragile Dialogue, New Voices of Liberal Zionism, a collection of essays published in 2017 to provide a basis for narrowing the differences in today's dialogue about Zionism. Dr. Holo's scholarship focuses on medieval Jews in the Mediterranean. In his book, Byzantine Jewry in the Mediterranean Economy, published by the Cambridge University Press, Dr. Holo discusses how the Jews in that time and that place engaged economically with their society. Today, however, Dr. Holo and the panel will relate to current concerns. Welcome, Dr. Holo and the panel.
Thank you, Abner, and welcome to all of you to the 6th Annual Y&S Nazarian Center for Israel Studies, Israel in 3D, Israeli-American Exchanges, and our session today on religion. And before we get too far along, I want to acknowledge that the handsome person above me is not me. I got a facelift with this. I am not Rabbi Erez Sherman. I'm sure you'll be able to connect each of the photos with the individuals as we move along. It's actually a test to keep you on your toes during the... I'd like briefly to lay out the format for our discussion today, which promises to be truly inspiring and engaging with outstanding panelists from whom I will join you in learning. I'll give a brief introduction to each of them in alphabetical order, which is the order in which they'll speak. They'll each speak for an all too short 8 minutes or so, after which we here on the panel will engage in a discussion moderated by me, and then following that, we will open up the floor so that you have the opportunity to ask questions until the end of our hour and a quarter together. The question that animates this particular session has not only to do with the idea of religion in general in the state, the land of Israel, but in particular an acknowledgement of the fact that religion plays a central role in, on the one hand, the identity of the people in the state of Israel and its constitution with a lowercase c, that is, the constituent elements that make Israel what it is, but also in the liberal democracy that is Israel, and raises all kinds of questions about what it means to have religion be a primary component in a country with non-Jewish minorities and a variety of Jewish expressions within it. And so we're going to ask our panelists to query that relationship between religion and the state of Israel a little bit, and furthermore, and quite specifically in the context of Israeli-American exchanges, which is the topic for this year's conference, to think a little bit out loud with us about the relationship between the United States and Israel and how that relationship inflects the role of religion in Israeli society. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists. I'll introduce them all at once, and then we will proceed one by one. To my immediate right is Rabbi Daniel Bouskila, who is the director of the Sephardic Education Center. The Sephardic Education Center is an international organization whose philosophy reflects classic Sephardic Judaism's creative blend of tradition and modernity. Under his leadership, the SEC has become a think tank that specializes in translating the modern halakhic approach and tolerant worldview of the major rabbinic personalities of the Sephardic tradition. He's also rabbi here of the Westwood Village Synagogue, a vibrant and welcoming modern Orthodox congregation committed to halakha, intellectual learning, Zionism, and women's issues. Ordained from Yeshiva University, Rabbi Bouskila also studied at Yeshivat Kerem B'Yavne in Israel and served in the IDF's Givati Infantry Brigade and studied S.Y. Agnon's literature at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's a regular contributor to the Jewish Journal of Greater Los Angeles and is working on translating the writings of Rabbi Ben-Zion Uziel, who was Israel's first Sephardic chief rabbi. To Rabbi Bouskila's right, skipping over to Chaya, two people down. Chaya Gilboa is a faculty member of the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. She's also the director of Jewish engagement at the Leichtag Foundation for 2 years in this period while studying at the University of San Diego, her husband. And she is responsible at the Leichtag Foundation for integration and education. Prior to joining Leichtag, she was the founding director of Chevruta, a pluralistic, integrated gap year program for Israeli and North American post-high school students at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. Born in Jerusalem to an ultra-Orthodox family, Chaya is committed to creating alternatives within the realm of religion and state, establishing Hashgacha Pratit, which is an alternative kashrut system, and crafting egalitarian wedding ceremonies and other initiatives that combine feminism and Jewish identity. Gilboa wrote her thesis for her MA in public policy at the Hebrew University on Haredi women, religion, and state. To Chaya Gilboa's right is Dr. Aliza Lavi. Dr. Lavi is a senior lecturer at Bar Ilan University and a leading author, publicist, and social activist. She's an expert in the role of women in Judaism, Israel-diaspora relations, and pluralism in Israel. As a recent member of Knesset for the Yesh Atid party from 2013 to 2019, she chaired both the Committee on the Status of Women and Gender Equality and the Caucus on Religion and State, the latter focusing on strengthening Israel's relationship with diaspora Jewry and maintaining Israel's commitment to be a Jewish and a democratic state. Dr. Lavi's academic research examines women in Jewish culture and identity, the Jewish world, politics, and society. The English version of her book, A Jewish Women's Prayer Book, which came out by Random House in 2008, won the 2008 National Jewish Book Award. And finally, Rabbi Erez Sherman. Rabbi Erez Sherman is rabbi at Sinai Temple here on the west side, and he has been a leading advocate in the Los Angeles Jewish community for a stronger relationship between American Jews and Israel. While serving as assistant rabbi of Shomrei Torah Synagogue from 2009 to 2014, Rabbi Erez created the Israel Ambassador Program, which enhanced Israel advocacy for teens and adults and doubled the size of the congregation's APAC delegation. He has continued building stronger connections between the American Jewish community and Israel, while at Sinai Temple, through the Israel Center and his involvement with the temple's APAC delegations. Rabbi Sherman was ordained from the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in May of 2009, where he was awarded the United Synagogue Award for Congregational Service. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our panelists to speak one by one, and we will begin with Rabbi Bouskila.
Thank you. Boker Tov, good morning, everyone. I think I'd like to open up by just getting this off my chest, expressing that sitting in an Israel conference this weekend with everything going on in Israel, I think we, of course, as we're sitting here in UCLA and discussing these various fascinating issues, we always want to keep in mind and that we pray that for continued quiet and peace in Israel, and we hope that the situation calms down. It's very disturbing for all of us, and in light of all of that, it kind of puts a different aura on, I think, our discussion today, but nonetheless, we'll engage in this important topic. What I'd like to present to you today is based on the work that my center is doing, which I think will one day soon have tremendous impact, hopefully, at a larger level than the grassroots level we're working at right now. When most of you hear the word Sephardic, there's been a stereotype for a long time. The moment that that term pops up, it immediately conjures up images of cultural activities. So often I get invited to speak on panels and they say, or I get invited to speak as a guest speaker and they say, we want to hear about Sephardic Judaism, we want to hear what they eat at Memona, what's the difference between Sephardim and Ashkenazim on Pesach, why do you eat rice, very colorful modes of dress and particular ethnic celebrations. I want to tell you that my center that I work for has absolutely nothing to do with any of that. Zero. The Sephardic Educational Center, I mean, we love good food and we love good parties. It's all great. But that's not what we're about at all. As Dr. Holo, Rabbi Holo pointed out, the work that we're doing is trying to bring to light what we call the classic Sephardic message, which I believe probably when it was written back in the day was not as relevant as it is and needed as it is to the world than it is today. What do I mean by that? There's been an unfortunate narrative in Israel as to what halakha means. There's been an unfortunate narrative in Israel as to what being a chief rabbi means. And when we talk about religion and state, for a moment, I'm a big believer that there should be religious elements to the state of Israel. But what's happened to the Rabbanut HaRashit, the chief rabbinate, is that it's not about religion and state. It's about political parties and religion. It's very partisan, and I include in that an aberration from the classic Sephardic tradition called Shas, which has absolutely nothing to do in terms of the classic Sephardic message, not in mode of dress, not in way of thinking, not sociologically. It's very, very different than some of the rabbis that I want to introduce you, just to kind of plant the seed in your minds. Back in the day, before the state of Israel was declared, there was one chief rabbi. I'm not going to have the time to speak about all of them. And when I talk about classic Sephardic rabbis, I'm not talking about the golden age of Spain. I'm not talking about Maimonides or Ibn Ezra or Abarbanel. I'm talking about rabbis from the 19th and 20th centuries, names that I guarantee you most of you have never heard, like Rabbi Yosef Masash, like Rabbi Ben Zion Meir Hai Uziel. These were prominent, brilliant rabbinic thinkers. And most of the time what I've done, for example, if I had more time, I would have done it with you here. I've brought writings of theirs about Jewish law, about women's issues, about who is a Jew, about conversion. And I've translated them into English, brought them to audiences just like this, did not identify who wrote. And I brought it to the community and I said, please read. I said, who do you think wrote this? And they said, this must have come out of Hebrew Union College or Jewish Theological Seminary. It's very liberal, it's very progressive, it's very forward thinking. And then I say, flip over the picture, and you see the picture of the rabbi who said it. Most of the rabbis were donned in long embroidered robes with turbans, spoke Arabic, right? And were what the Ashkenazi world will call Orthodox, although the term Orthodox never existed in the Sephardic world. I have a very close friend. I was talking to Dr. Lavi. We know someone in common in Jerusalem named Chacham David Menachem. And he said, He's a brilliant young Sephardic rabbi, great scholar in Jerusalem, and he said, when my grandfather arrived from Iraq to the land of Israel, had somebody asked him in Hebrew, Ha'im ata orthodoxy, are you Orthodox? He would have said, no, I'm feeling fine, thanks. Like, never heard of that term. The classic Sephardic tradition always believed in blending the traditional world and the modern world and finding a middle path in between, not veering to any extreme to the right or to the left. Now, if you read about the one chief rabbi that I want to take the last few minutes of my time to introduce you, is it 8 minutes or 8 minutes and so? You said 8 minutes plus.
7 to 8.
7 to 8 minutes, okay, I'll do my best. So, Rabbi Ben-Zion Meir Chai Uziel, this is a name that I want you to know about in the context of our discussions today. He was the only chief rabbi, Ashkenazi or Sephardic, to serve under 3 political administrations. He became Chacham Bashi, which was the Turkish title for the chief rabbi, under the Ottoman Empire. Then in 1939, he became the chief Sephardic rabbi under the British Mandate, and in 1948, of course, under the newly declared Medinat Israel, together with Rav Herzog, the 2 first chief rabbis of Israel. One of them wore a turban and a long robe. The other one wore that beautiful top hat and tails. They were very distinguished thinkers. And when you read both of their writings, actually, both Rav Herzog, but especially Rav Uziel, when you read of Rav Uziel's writings about what it means to be a rabbi, what it means to be a chief rabbi, what will be the relationship between religion in the country, I would retitle any of his writings about that, Once Upon a Time in a Galaxy Far, Far Away. It is so far removed from what's happened to the chief rabbinate and to religion in the state of Israel. Just on the question of conversion, for example, I don't have the time to get into the detail, but if 50% of Rav Uziel's halakhic positions on conversion would be adopted in the state of Israel today, 99% of the whole problem of who is a Jew and the relationship between America and Israel and the whole question and the conversion crisis, all of that would go away. Because the interpretation that the state of Israel's chief rabbinate today has adopted is the interpretation of the most extreme positions. And Rav Uziel and others have been silenced. There's one rabbi today, he was a member of Knesset, he's a close friend, Rabbi Amsalem. He is like on a mission to try to change all of this. He's tried to get into the Knesset. He's done everything he could I really admire him. He wants to be back in the Knesset so much. He was in Shas. He left the Shas party to go try to form his own party. It wasn't easy. He tried running for the Knesset on the most recent list, except he found himself in the very odd position of a rabbi who had to sit and answer questions about why he's running under a ticket whose one of its main hot ticket items was the legalization of marijuana in Israel. So he had a very hard time. They didn't make it in. But Rabbi Amsalem is another name you should look up. If his positions were adopted, and they're not his positions, they're positions of the classic Sephardic rabbis, things in Israel would change. The problem I believe that's going on in Israel today is that as long as political parties with very, very limited views, very, very sectarian views, who are no longer thinking about the Jewish people as a whole, including in Israel, but they're only thinking about their party, about their population's interest. As long as that continues to be the way a chief rabbi is elected, the state of Israel and the relationship between Israel and the United States is going to continue. Let me read you just one quote from Rabbi Uziel when he spoke to a group of rabbis who were about to become rabbanim in the state of Israel. Listen to what he said to them. As you approach the seat of the rabbinate that you will sit upon after your election, take to heart that the full domain of mishpat, that means civil law in terms of Judaism is a very, very complicated set of laws that he envisions should come back to the state of Israel. That the fact that the Torah discusses how it's important to treat our neighbor, it's important to treat our friends, how to treat the stranger, All of that should be what the chief rabbis think about, not just putting a label of kashrut on a restaurant or deciding who is a Jew, but deciding how the Jew will behave one towards the other. He says, take to heart the full domain of its mishpat, including all of its problems and issues, has been placed in your hands, and it will be upon you, listen carefully, through trustworthiness, love, honor, and admiration, to bring the entire nation closer to the values of Judaism, civil law, tzedek, righteousness, social justice, and the truthful execution of social justice to the fullest extent of the truth. This is what he envisioned for rabbis, that they should be agents of social change. So I'll give you one final thing. One of the programs that we run in our center is a program called Merchav. Merchav is a acronym for Manhigut Rabbanit Chevratit, which is translated as meaning socially conscious rabbinic leadership. Who are the rabbis? We don't ordain rabbis. They were already ordained by the chief rabbinate. And what do they learn in being ordained to the chief rabbinate? They learn all about the laws that seem to, that are very specific to kashrut, and they don't learn how to be rabbis. They don't learn how to deal with communities. So we have a program where they come once a week to our center, and they study what general society here would call tikkun olam, what in Israel they would call tzedek chevrati, social justice, all being taught through the lenses of all these Sephardic rabbis that I talked about. Every single one of the Sephardic rabbis that we deal with in terms of trying to translate their writings, and I don't mean just translate them from Hebrew to English, I mean translate them into living realities in Israeli society today, so they're back in the siach hatziburi, they're part of the communal discussion. All of these rabbis had a very powerful emphasis on social justice, unity, trying to make halakha work for the general public and not be something sectarian. This is something that we hope continues to be part of at the grassroots level, and soon enough, we'd like to take it to the national level, where we hope we could affect a change, not for Sephardic Jews, for the Jewish people.
Thank you, Rabbi Bouskila. Before I invite Chaya Gilboa to speak, I want to remind you all, if you have pen and paper with you, to write down your questions so that when we do get to the public Q&A, you can be as focused and as succinct as possible. In the meanwhile, let us move on. Chaya Gilboa.
Toda. Shalom, everyone. Maybe I'll start with some hope, because I'm an activist and I'm from Jerusalem, so that's what we do. But last weekend, in my community now, in my current community in San Diego, which I'm part of for the next one more year, Pau is 20 minutes from where I work, and we were so upset with everything that happened. But the most amazing thing that happened less than 24 hours after the attack is that my Muslim friend from the Interfaith Center in San Diego contacted us. We were supposed to celebrate, going back to what you said, we were supposed to celebrate at Mimuna together, which is traditionally a holiday that brings together, celebrate the differences, bring together Muslims and Jews. And we were supposed to do it together. And then the attack happened, and he contacted me and he said, Chaya, I'm not sure, is it the right time? Maybe the Jewish community just want to be together. Also, some of us who wear hijab and other things that it's understand that we're Muslims, we're not sure we want to come now to a Jewish organization, institutions. And we're thinking a lot about how really to approach that. And something happened that sometimes I feel can happen only in America, or maybe only in California, which I always really want to bring back to Jerusalem, is that there is something here in the Jewish community that can really think beyond the differences. And we got together with Muslim and Christians, and we felt very strongly that many times in America, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism can come together. Not all the time, but sometimes. And maybe it's what we really need to do is to come together and as out of solidarity and to do something. And I'm starting with that because I think, I grew up in Jerusalem. My family is 9 generations in Jerusalem. And And I think one of the things that I learn every time I work or I live a little bit in America is these opportunities that exist here and are very natural to the Jewish community, is how to work cross sectors. 10 years ago, I was working at Hillel, at Berkeley Hillel. I came for 2 years. I was part of the Hillel staff. And I will never forget, I was stepping into the building, Israeli, stepping into the building of Hillel. It was Friday. And there were 4 minyans on that Friday. At the bottom was the Orthodox minyan with a mechita and everything, and a man led the service. On the top floor was a conservative minyan, and then next to it a Reform minyan and a Reconstructionist minyan. It was all happening at the same building. Now for Israeli, it's something that you will never see in Israel. And the most amazing thing was, right after the services were ended, all the leaders of the 4 minyanim, men and women, stood on the stage at Berkeley Hillel, held the Kiddush cup, and led the Kiddush together. And I really remember that moment when I looked at it and I thought, it's possible, because it's not the type of conversation that I grew up with. I think it's very different when it comes to Israel. In the current elections, my family, there is 7 of us, we literally voted for 6 parties. And we still can come together every Shabbat dinner. And I think in that sense, sometimes I felt 10 years ago and still today, around Israel, I think Jewish communities sometimes have more difficult time to bring different perspective. But when it comes to Jewish, like the pluralism, we have so much to learn from you. And maybe that's what I want to talk a little bit. I grew up in Har Nof, which is an ultra-Orthodox community in Israel. My father is what we call Haredi, ultra-Orthodox, with all the accessories. And my mom is very, very religious as well. I'm one of 5. And I grew up, I think, it's a very complex thing to grow up as a woman in an ultra-Orthodox society. As you can imagine. I think maybe there are different communities, or maybe today is a little bit different than it used to be. But when I grew up, I literally felt that even so I speak Jewish before I speak Hebrew, everything I do is Jewish. I don't have the vocabulary to talk about who I am, bichlal, at all. Like, the whole identity conversation does not exist in the community that I came from. And I felt like I was expected only to implement. I was never part of those who are thinking and creating. And I really wanted to be just part of those who write the next story. I didn't want to look behind the mechita on the men performing the rituals. But in the community that I grew up, there is no 50 Shades of Grey. There is black and white. And when I had questions, I needed to leave. And I always say I left just to be able to come back from different perspective. I had my own journey, and I was, as I said, here at Berkeley. But I took classes at Berkeley. I studied Talmud and gender there, which I always say, if there is a place on the planet that is opposite than Har Nof, is Berkeley. And it's good to visit the 2 Ktsavot, how do you say? Yes. And I was sitting in a class, and Professor Daniel Bouskila gave the class about the divorce system. And the whole conversation in class was, yeah, of course, that's how it was 2,000 years ago when women didn't have any power in societies. And I was sitting there and I thinking to myself, this is not a history class. This is actually what is going on today in Israel and in other Jewish communities. But in Israel, the system is even more complex than in other, when you don't have any alternatives. And I think that moment I realized that that's what I want to do. And I want to try to bring maybe my past that I had mixed feeling towards. Maybe I wanted to start work from my past, but really to bring my feminism and liberalism into Israeli society. When I came back, I had a coffee house at Nachlaot. It's a very unique neighborhood in Jerusalem. I was studying for my MA in public policy, focusing on religion and state, worked a little bit at the Knesset with Tzipi Livni. She used to be the head of the opposition. We tried to create Jewish alternatives to the rabbinic court. One of the things that I knew, and maybe because I grew up religious, and the house that I go to every other week is my parents' house, which I love. And so I never felt like breaking that system is the right solution. Even so, I'm secular today. Even so, my feministic identity sometimes really contradict with the Orthodox court in Israel. But I felt very strongly that we need to create alternative to what exists today. I did this a little bit at the parliament. But when I had my coffee shop at Nachlaot, we tried to create a coffee shop that is kind of like a social business. And I knew I don't want to have kashrut certificate in my coffee. No way. I knew at the time that, first of all, the rabbinic court does not hire women to be supervisors, which is interesting. I told the chief rabbi, this is the only thing I learned in school, how to run a kosher kitchen. So here, there is an opportunity for women to serve as supervisors, mashgichot. How come you're not giving us the only position we can take? And he said, I know. Baruch. But it took time. But at the time, it wasn't the case. And he told me, which was amazing to hear, he said to me, you know, Chaya, when a woman go to like a cafe owner and said to him, the way you clean the rice wasn't in a halakhic way, the woman become a little bit like a rabbi, like she, or like, and this is something that we can't have. So I knew that there was no woman in the system. I was interviewing many restaurants and cafes at Jerusalem, asking them how the procedure goes, like how much do you pay for the certificate? How does it work with the supervisors? And we found out that in many cases the payment is very different, is according to how much you know the cousin of the son of who know the supervisor. And also the way that sometimes the supervisors come and do their work, it's not always in a way, like they don't work with the owner of the cafe. They come top down, do what they do. And we felt strongly we need to create an alternative to that. So I approached to an Orthodox American rabbi. And here I want to say something which I think is interesting to me. Every time I dealt with gender issues in Israel and religion and state, the rabbis who I could work with were either Sephardic rabbis or American rabbis. And it was amazing to see, especially in Jerusalem, that all of the initiatives that I was part of, mostly the feministic initiatives, but the kashrut one as well, my partners were Orthodox rabbi, or Orthodox community members. And I think the reason is, and I learned it with time, that you understand the concept. Like, Rav Aaron Leibovich, the rabbi, told me, Chaya, the fact that I'm Orthodox doesn't mean that the entire public space has to echo my values. I can still be Orthodox, and the public space can have different expressions. I think in Israel, it's not always the case. Many times you see, that Orthodox communities or individuals, and I'm not saying 100%, but there are people that has a lot of power, many times will use Jewish halakha in order to shape the public space to look like them. One of the things that I was working on is how you can give kashrut certificate to places that are open on Shabbat. And guess what? It's okay. You can do it halachically. You can't give a kashrut certificate to a place that open on Shabbat. You can give certificate that the place is kasher from Sunday to Friday. That's it. There is some little things you need to do in order to make sure it's kosher, but it's possible. But in Israel, today the rabbinic court present to, let's say, secular owner of cafes, if you want to get a kashrut certificate, the place has to be closed on Shabbat. If you open it on Shabbat, it stops being kosher, which is not the case. But the rabbinic court knows that most of the secular or the average Israeli doesn't know to separate between what is halakha and what is politica, what is political thing. And I think what I feel very strongly that when I work in so many different issues, but especially in that with American Orthodox that from one hand are committed to halakha, but at the same time are committed to pluralism and understanding that public space has to reflect the Jewish community of the world today and not only a specific group within it. I think that's make it very practical and yeah, thank you.
I now would like to invite Dr. Eliza Lavi for a
Would you like to go stand up?
Hi, good morning. I'm so privileged to be here and to speak with you. When I hear my colleagues, where are the Sephardic rabbis? Unfortunately, most of them become Shas. And you are so unique, Rabbi. You are so unique. You need your voice in Israel. We are alone. Where is all the Sephardic rabbis? And about women, tell me about it. For many years, I felt like a second-class citizen in my own religion. We have to work so hard to bring our place back in Israel. Yesterday, I went to visit Randy Grossman, sister of Lori, that lost, you was there. And she told me, Eliza, because we heard the news when Shabbat went out from Israel, what's happened in Gaza and in Ashkelon. And she told me, tell the people of Israel that we are all one community. And I told her about the panel this morning, and she asked me to say here and in Israel, don't forget that we are all one community. And this conference, think about it. It's between the Holocaust Day in Israel and the Memorial Day and the Independence Day. I call these days the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the social days, of thinking. And thanks to the organizers of this conference, we have the ability to sit on the stage this day and think about our position, our privilege, our present as a Jewish Israeli together. We have problems. We need to solve them, and we need more patience and more love in between us. And these days is not randomly after Pesach. In Pesach, the most important mitzvah is not to eat matzah or kneidalach. The most important mitzvah is to sit together around the table, all of us together. It doesn't matter who we are, Orthodox, not Orthodox, someone who left, Sephardic, whatever, and sit together and speak and remember our past and remember our future and our duty to tell the story. והגעת לבנך, והגעת לביתך, to tell our children and to tell ourselves our story, where we came from. And sometimes we forget this discussion, and we don't have time when we have a lot of duties. But in Passover, we need to sit together. And the people of Israel that chose these days after Passover, they thought about it. Because sometimes we forget who we are and what is our obligations and what it means to be all one. And yes, even in the parliament, I spent the last 7 years in the Israeli parliament. And Israel is a very unique society, a Jewish and a democratic state. And yes, some people in the parliament want to add more to the democratic state. And some people want to add more to the Judaism. And here we are, fighting all each other. One of the legislation that I try to achieve, yes, it's a conversion. And the conversion legislation become a gender issue. It becomes a gender issue because 85, 87 from the request are from women. Young women are asking to come and be Jewish. And they are Jewish, believe me. Zera Israel, you mentioned Rabbi Amsalem. He's a very close friend of mine. And I am the one that went to the Supreme Court because, when these people that got the approval from IDF, because most of them are doing this process via IDF, and they want to get married, and they go to the rabbinical court, and suddenly I found the rabbinical court said, no, we don't recognize the approval from the army. How dare you do it? So I went to the Supreme Court, and we won. But why it should be like this? This is our brothers and our sister, and more than 20 years, we don't deal with it. Because, you know why? Because your friends, the Sephardic one, afraid, and they took their head down instead of, put like this and say to the Ashkenazic, who are you to say that they are not Jew? And we need your help in Israel, and you know it. We are alone there. People leave either the secular colleagues, they say, Aliza, it's not that important. Why you need to deal with it? They are here, they're serving the army, they are together with us. But it's not true. When I speak with these young ladies that are coming to my home every Shabbat and learn and study because they need someone to support them, the gap between the rabbinical court and the ultra-Orthodox people that are sitting there to these ladies is they can't solve it by themselves. And my first legislation in the parliament was to bring women to the committee that choose this rabbinical, because before that, no woman was allowed to be in this committee, not to be elected like Deborah, the prophet, because we knew, if you're familiar with our history, we knew that we had before woman, that she was a prophet, and she was judge, and she was a army strategic, and she knew how to do, but we forgot. And when I realized that I'm second-class citizen in my own religion, I went and made my own research. And I found a lot of voices, and the oldest one is from the 13th century that was written by Paula bat Rabbi Avraham, Paula, the daughter of Abraham, from north of Italy. And in the end of the copy in the end of the book that she copied, 13th century, she copied a book in Hebrew. It means she allowed to copy the book. She wrote the amazing prayer for other women in her condition. So it means that women had the power, had a right to do things, but something happened during the ages, and we need to learn from the history and try to bring back answers to the future, including in this panel. And believe me, I work very hard between democratic and Judaism, a lot of legislations, but I think that the parliament should stop, because enough is enough, and we as people can solve the issues and the problems. And if I have 1 more minute, I have. So I want to share with you a small story that I told before. When the rabbi of Moscow came to me and told me about the situation in Russia, that many women are become agunot. You know what is aguna? When the husband leaves the wife without giving get. And he asked my help. And he told me, Eliza, these women are alone. Their husbands become rich and they forget them, and they don't want to develop their properties, etc., etc. And a lot of women are agunot in Russia and in countries around Russia. Please help us. I told him, I belong to the opposition. What do you want from me? Go to the ultra-Orthodox party. And he told me, Eliza, you are the aunt to solve it. And in the end of the day, after 3 years of work, very hard working, because, you know, these ladies are not Israeli citizens, and how come that the rabbinical court can help them? And I gave the mandate, me, that want to, you know, reduce the mandate of the rabbinical court. I gave the mandate to this rabbinical court to help these women, because I know since I came to the parliament that I'm not only represent Israeli citizens, I'm also represent your people, because it's our duty. It's my duty and responsibility to work for all the Jewish world. And now, thanks to this legislation, 12 women got divorced via the Israeli rabbinical court, even though that they are not Israeli citizens. So on one hand, we have to think very carefully about what it means responsibility in our days between Israel and the Jewish communities. We have a lot of work to do. And on the other hand, we need to understand and to have and bring much more sensitivity to these relationships, especially to the question, who is Jew, and how can we make it much better for our future. Thank you very much.
And for our last panelist, I'd like to invite Rabbi Erez Sherman for final words.
So I'm going to speak as a conservative rabbi in America looking toward Israel. First, because I met my wife, Rabbi Nicole Guzik, also at Sinai Temple, while studying in Israel, in Jerusalem, and went back and got engaged at the Kotel. But I want to share just a few stories over my 10 years as a rabbi here in Los Angeles, actually interacting with Israelis that live here. And a few words have been thrown around this panel that I'm careful to use. One is religious, 2 is observant, and 3 is secular. Because I think those terms often are loaded with many things behind them, that when you ask somebody, or they tell you, I'm religious, and they explain to you what that means, it's a completely different perception than what actually another person's definition of those words mean. The first was one of my first years here in Los Angeles. I was leading a service with a chazanit, a cantorial vocalist. She was Israeli. She sang in her army service, was in the musical wing of the IDF. And we started outlining the Rosh Hashanah service, and we spoke about what we'll do for our shofar service on Rosh Hashanah. And she looked at me like I was crazy, and she said, Rabbi, we don't blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. I said, well, we do. Well, what are you talking about? And she explained to me that the only time she was ever in a synagogue each year with her family was Ne'ilah at the end of Yom Kippur. And that was when she would hear the shofar. And therefore, she had no knowledge, and she said she was not alone, that even the shofar, which so many run to the synagogue in America to hear, didn't even know that existed on the holiday of Rosh Hashanah. Number 2, Sinai Temple is honored this year to be part of the Shinshin program, the Shnat Sherut of 18-year-olds. Before they go to their army service, come and give a volunteer year here. As we go there to give a gap year, now they go here. It's through the Jewish Agency, and we're honored to have 4 young people with us this year, 3 young women and 1 man. And when they started learning about Judaism here in America, myself, my wife, and the other rabbis at Sinai Temple quickly found out that they, of course, never had a bat mitzvah the way that they were seeing in our synagogue week after week. And so in a couple of weeks in June, these 2 Israeli young women who are 18 years old are going to have their Benot Mitzvah at Sinai Temple. And they actually have been taught this past year by a female rabbinical student from the American Jewish University. And on the application, actually, when the Shinshins come here, it's a fascinating question that I hope one day will change. The question is Shabbat, and they respond yes or no. And it was very difficult for me to see that you were going to receive an Israeli inter-community, and as Chaya said, it was black or white. It wasn't, well, I do Shabbat this way or I do Shabbat this way. It was Shabbat, and the child has to answer yes or no. And that depends on where they're located or placed within our community. The third, however, is an optimistic part of this. The Mati is the Israeli cultural sort of community within Los Angeles. They do amazing, amazing events. And actually, over this past few years at Sinai Temple, they have chosen to hold their events in a synagogue, which I would actually say is a big development, where many Israelis, of course, they will not enter a synagogue because it's just a different system of religion within Israel. Now they're having the Shira B'Tzibor, the community song sessions, holiday programs, Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, etc., and they're finally hosting them, going into the synagogue walls. And it's a big breakthrough because now rabbis, religious leaders have the opportunity to engage with Israelis. And I remember just speaking with them just a couple of months ago, and they were shocked at what we do on a day-to-day basis as a rabbi in America. They were shocked that we are teaching, that we are engaging young people, middle-aged people, elderly people. And actually, even over the last few months, I've seen these Israelis within this country of America trickle into religious programming as well. When I was in the Valley for 5 years, obviously a very large Israeli community, I began to see a challenge that I see maybe 2 years down the road. And that is Israelis, and I'm being general for a moment, Israelis that come to this country who are not Orthodox. A large connection to their Judaism is what? It's Ivrit, it's Hebrew. I'm very nervous that If somebody is in this country, in America, outside of Israel, and their only connection is Hebrew, and we know a couple of generations later, their children and grandchildren are not speaking as much Hebrew as them, then what is their connection to Israel and Judaism? And I think, therefore, we have to work very strongly with the Israeli community in Los Angeles, which has one of the largest Israeli communities outside of Israel in this country, to connect them actually with religion here, whether it's conservative, Reform, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, whatever it is, to understand that they can also go back to Israel and preach the pluralistic religion that they're seeing here in this country. In fact, in 2010, Tzipi Livni came to the Rabbinical Assembly Convention, the conservative rabbis, happened to be in Las Vegas, and she said, "We don't know you." She said, "We don't know you." Now, I don't want to use that as an excuse, but I took that as a challenge. I was a first-year rabbi then, and I thought, if they don't know us, then how are we going to introduce ourselves to them? And what I found over these past 10 years was completely contradictory to what I thought I was going to find, is that I'm actually teaching Judaism here and importing it back into our holy land of Israel, as opposed to exporting Judaism this way as well. And last but not least, I think one of the greatest examples of this is actually, I can speak specifically of Camp Ramah here in Ojai, California, but also around the country, and really all the different camps, is the Mishlachat program, where these Israelis are coming to camps around the country of all different denominations. They're spending immersive experiences living with children and families, etc., and they're learning how to have different minyanim. I remember when I was at Columbia University, Hillel, it was the same thing. Yes, we would have our separate minyanim, but at Sudah Shlishit on Saturday afternoon, we would all be together, and I'm hearing this in my mind now, we would all be together singing Achenu Kol Beit Yisrael, that we are all brothers and sisters of the land of Israel. So I think that, again, even though there are challenges, what I have seen as a rabbi focused here in America, now specifically on the West Coast, knowing that we have an amazing opportunity to be a voice to actually send back to Israel. And the last thing I want to say also, which has been a trend, is that we have our B'nai Mitzvah here, over 100 B'nai Mitzvah at Sinai Temple a year, but many of our families thankfully go to Israel, and they want to have an experience where? At the Kotel. Thankfully, we have the southern wall where we can have egalitarian B'nai Mitzvah, men and women together. But our congregants come to the rabbis and they say, well, what do we do over there? How do we do it? And when we can't go to every bar mitzvah in Israel, thankfully we have our Masorati partners, our conservative rabbis who live in Israel, not often funded by the government. However, we have been able to establish a connection there. Because when we're preaching that a young woman can wear a talit and our bima, but when she goes to the land of Israel, she can't do that. That's also something that's a bit of a difficulty. However, I would say again optimistically, as Chaya said with the words of tikva and hope, that what we are doing here, God willing, does have an impact there, and therefore it's not that we don't know us, but in fact they want to know us going to the years ahead.
I want to thank all of our panelists for their remarkable words and experiences. I'd like to divide the panel discussion amongst us thematically and invite you all to speak, but I will focus the two guiding questions to two of you respectively, mapping onto the primary themes of this session, which is religion in Israel as a constituent component of the society's identity and legal framework, which can sometimes be challenging for pluralism, both across and within religions. And beyond that, the second component of our theme, which is the capacity for the diaspora Jewish experience, and in this case specifically the American Jewish experience, to inflect, to change, to enrich, and deepen perhaps Israel's own experience with Judaism. So with respect to the first part, regarding Israel more or less on its own terms, before we get into the American capacity for influence, I'd like to ask Rabbi Bouskila and Chaya Gilboa in particular, although I welcome everyone to join in, about something that I feel you both acknowledged, but we didn't have the opportunity yet to fully delve into as a challenge. Rabbi Bouskila, you referred to your sense of the difference between the capacity for religion to enrich the civic and state enterprise, to be contrasted to the raw pursuit of power by religious parties, if I can summarize your position accurately. And Chaya, you also spoke in similar terms of the fact that Israelis can't always distinguish between those two things that Rabbi Bouskila articulated, namely Israelis themselves, because they are not necessarily schooled in halakha, they don't necessarily know when they're being confronted by raw political efforts, or what they're being confronted with is legitimate halakhic or Jewish concerns. What I want to ask you both is the following, to elaborate a bit. Is it not possible that the Israeli lowercase c constitution, the core civic and basic law decisions of the State of Israel, have tremendously impeded the capacity for Israelis to make the distinctions that you're asking us and them to make? Are we at risk of a deeper danger that we can't get out of?
Yeah. Look, again, I'm an activist. We count victories, so I'm very optimistic, but truly I am optimistic. I think you're right, and I think many times in Israel we feel that Judaism is equal orthodoxy. And to be honest, it's so interesting, but since I started working in America, I realized that approximately 70% of my secular friends are actually Reform. They just don't know that. They don't admit to be Reform. And if I will tell them that they're actually the way they live their life, it's exactly as my Reform or friends in America, they would be upset. They will look at it as I offended them. But actually, this is what it is. And I think the Reform and conservative movement changed completely as a pluralistic discourse in Israel, without us giving them the credit of doing it. But I think today in Israel there is a lot of ignorancy. Agree, but I'm optimistic. I think when I was started being very much involved in the marriage system, I don't know how many of you know, but since 1953, the rabbinic court has the authority to handle what we call the personal status, meaning all the most important thing in our life that define who we are, getting married, getting divorced, convert, being buried, everything that really is what makes us, like, identity-wise who we are, is taken away by a very small group that not represent us. And to be honest, most of my Orthodox friend, modern Orthodox friend, will tell you that they are not even represent them. And when I was start being involved in the marriage system in Israel, I was working with couples, and I officiate weddings, and that are not recognized in Israel. And I got married in a egalitarian Orthodox ceremony, and we never register. So in Israel, I'm a single mother. When I started working with couples in Israel to explain them, I told them, make your own decision. Go, if you want at the end to go and marry through the Rabbanut, it's fine. I just want you to know what it means. What it means about your ceremony, what does it mean if you, God forbid, want to be separate from each other. And I was amazed to see, first of all, that so many people in Israel doesn't even think about it. Like, it doesn't even cross their mind, because they're a part of the privileged community. When they come to register, if they doesn't have Russian background, and they're like, let's say, simply Israelis, they have no bureaucracy problems, so they just do it. And by doing it, they actually support that system. But I'm saying I'm an optimist because in the past 7 years, when I was start really be part of these different initiatives, I see more and more couples that says, I can marry at the Rabbanut, but I choose not to do it as a solidarity with my gay friend, as solidarity with my interfaith friends, and as a solidarity with feminism and with everything that the Rabbanut doesn't stand for. So I think today in Israel, and I think Dr. Aliza Lavi, which did an amazing important work at the Knesset, which I don't know how much you're aware of, how hard it's to be a woman in Israeli parliament and a religious woman in Israel parliament who work for religion and state issues. Be'emet, it's outstanding. I think we, the people, have to do, we need to work with them and to do bottom-up work, so whatever they do, like top-down, that we can like we can speak to one another, because it's not going to work. In Israel, even like a law that doesn't support by the people is not going to really create the change. So I'm saying I'm optimistic because I think today there is more room in Israeli society for more Hebraic identities. People doesn't want to be just Orthodox or secular. People are start talking in a much more sophisticated and complex conversations. So I think we're trying to reclaim back what is ours, which is Jewish tradition and Jewish wisdom, that it's not only belong to the Orthodox court. So yeah.
You know, leave it to the Jewish people to establish a state that resembles a page of Talmud. You know, like, it's like everything is an analysis. The whole country is a debate, but I think that's the vibrancy of the Jewish people for 2,000 years, and we created a state that almost mirrors that multiplicity of debates on every issue. I remember the late Zichrono Livracha Amos Oz was a very dear friend of mine, once told me, the problem in Israel is not who is a Jew according to the law, but what is the law according to the Jew. Because there are many, many interpretations of what law is in Israel. If you just walk the street or walk from one end of Machane Yehuda to the other and you ask that question, you'll get anything from the Knesset to my rabbi, to the chief rabbi, to my Rosh Yeshiva, to I don't care, to, you know, you'll get, it's not a unified understanding of who even has the legal voice. I'm also going to be optimistic on this question, and where's Mara? Mara's here, Mara Resnick. I'm going to dip back to the last time I sat on the panel in this room to talk about a phenomenon that I think has been absent, surprisingly, from this panel. And it was the discussion a few years back when I sat on this panel, which I think is a wonderful development in the last 15, 20 years in Israel. And I think it was spearheaded, actually, by somebody who's half Sephardic. I think she was a member of the Knesset as well, Ruth Calderon, who created the first, what we call like secular yeshiva in Israel, Alma, right? And the whole development of what's called in Hebrew the Hitchachut HaYehudit, the Jewish renewal amongst Israelis in Israel. And you know, I'm going to, you know, I don't want to disagree with some of the things that were said here, but I do believe that there is a greater level of literacy, of Jewish literacy in Israel today than there was 20, 30 years ago amongst especially young people. There are a wealth of batei midrash, houses of learning, where you have this avowedly secular Israelis who do not consider themselves Reform, conservative, Orthodox, but consider themselves Israelis, who are sitting and studying Talmud, who are sitting and studying Midrash, who are sitting and studying halakha. I remember the first time I went to visit one of these places, it had a title that for me, as a product of the yeshiva world my whole life, had a strange, what is it in Hebrew, tzlil muzal. It had like a very strange ring to it. It's called HaYeshiva HaChilonit, the secular yeshiva. I said, I want to go and see this. I was actually with the Hartman Institute. They took us to see this place. And I walked into a Bet Midrash, and the bookshelf looked exactly like the bookshelf that I was accustomed to. The Talmud, the Midrash, the Tanakh, Rashi, Halakha, etc. Who was sitting around the tables? Young boys and girls about to go into the army. They were sitting, most of the boys had no kippot on. The girls were not necessarily dressed like what you'd be accustomed to in a religious seminary. And they were sitting and studying Torah. So I asked them, I said, what are you doing here? They said, we're studying Torah. I said, no, what are you doing here? What is this about? And they said something absolutely fascinating. They said, our parents, the original generation of Israel, founded a state which included a government, an army, an economy, an infrastructure. But they didn't really do the Jewish thing very well. And they didn't give us, our generation, and this is already 15, 20 years ago when I visited this place, they said they didn't provide for our generation a raison d'etre, a reason for being here. And we haven't found that reason in the writings of Herzl and Achad Ha'am, so we're looking in the Talmud and the Midrash. Now that's developed over the last 20 years into thousands of Israelis. I was told recently that an incredible statistic, The largest growing number of Torah study groups in Israel is where? Anyone want to guess? Not Jerusalem. Tel Aviv. Okay?
And also the kosher restaurants.
And in the kosher restaurants and in the coffee houses and so on, right? This is something that I think is really important. In my own institution, the Sephardic Educational Center, we just recently opened something which to the Shas party and to the Jewish world, you know, we're in the old city of Jerusalem. And I was told that if we want to have Muslim-Jewish dialogue in the old city, right, in our center, it might be a cool thing to do. But if we want to dare do what we're now doing, we need to get security in the old city. We opened a Bet Midrash for women who are studying feminist gender issues and halakha and Sephardic tradition. They said, do you guys have security? Because it's the old city of Jerusalem. They're not going to be very happy with having women come in and study topics like feminism and gender issues and Sephardi Mizrahi identity in the state of Israel. But this didn't exist 20 years ago. So I really do believe that today there's greater literacy amongst Israelis who know more about Judaism. And it's like I said in my earlier remarks, it's about taking it from the grassroots level to the next level. That's the challenge, because everything in Israel, including like basketball, is run by politics and is run by the government. So you have to somehow find your way, like Dr. Lavi did, or like Chaya did, even working with the parliament in order to get your voice heard. Otherwise, it stays too much at the grassroots.
I just want to say, throw it out there, let's also not ignore the fact that today Haredi women also are part of the change,
right.
meaning it's also within, and we see more and more Haredi women. You can look at the polls in Jerusalem and in the national election. You start having growing numbers of Haredi who does not vote to Haredi parties, are voting for more like interesting parties, and you see within the Haredi community that the women bring, as change changes, bring different things that also change the Haredi community from within.
Very true.
I'm now going to move to Q&A so that we have enough time for some questions to be asked. I'm going to read a question that came to me written. I'm going to direct it to Dr. Lavi. It's from Dr. Ruth Shamir, and it has to do with the juridical makeup of the State of Israel. Dr. Shamir asks, the Jewish state was proclaimed in the Israeli Declaration of Independence in 1948 to be Jewish and democratic. Is it possible that a state could indeed be called democratic, that A, doesn't have the separation of church and state such as we are used to, at least in the United States, certainly in France and other countries as well, nor, and here's where I would like Dr. Levy to focus if you would, does not have a written constitution. We've already spoken a little bit about the church and state issue. Perhaps you can elaborate on the fact that Israel does not have a written constitution in relation to this question.
Thank you for the question. You know, after 71 years to ask this question, we had to ask the establisher, because it's very challenging to have a democratic and a Jewish state. And they gave us a lot of work to achieve, but we can do it. We can do it. Israel is the only place in the world that, you know, on one hand, the Jewish state and democratic state. And, you know, I'm trying in the last 7 years to lead a legislation for civil marriage, like you spoke about it. We need civil marriage in Israel. How come? You know that this day, the situation that even if you get married in Prague or in Cyprus, in the end of the day, if you want to get divorced, you must go via the rabbinical court, even though you got married, civil marriage. So everything is so complicated in Israel. And after 71 years, it's really, really hard to make it different. And yeah, about constitution, come on, you know what is going to be the next government in Israel. So you want to ask me about constitution. Take, for example, because you mentioned, and I don't have time, women of the wall. Tell me about it. You know, my granny, she came from Afghanistan, 1920. When she went to the Kotel, together with her family, with my granny and her kids, they went all together, all the families together, without separation.
without separation. It was one place for everyone. Look at the pictures. And who made separation, you know? Rabbi Herzog, after 64, when, thank God, the Kotel came back to us. And he is the one that said, women, men. And you know that the women area, is fifth of the men area, without air condition, without shelter, without anything. Compare it. And in our days, it's so cruel to be there. And when women of the world ask to come with talit and tefillin, and it's not against the halacha. Rashi's daughters, Rashi had 4 daughters, and they were it. We know from our history that it's not against the halacha. But you know, when the chief rabbi of the Kotel has the mandate to decide, without committee, without the parliament, without anyone, he is the one to decide. So this is the situation. And when I came to the parliament, when I become the director of the committee, the Women's Status of Women Committee, the first thing I did, I invited to the Knesset for the first time after 20 years the chief rabbi of the Kotel, Sharansky, who had the Jewish agency, women of the wall, and all the others, the police, etc., etc. And for the first time, all of us sat together around the same table that I spoke before, the Passover table. And for the first time, we sat and we speak to each other. We need to speak. We need to bring the issue to the table. And you know what? We found a solution, and you're familiar with this solution. And Mandelblit and our Prime Minister agree with this solution. We are talking now about the third arena, egalitarian arena, all together. But suddenly, the ultra-Orthodox came with so many excuses and so many political issues. So we can solve the problem, believe me. And knowledge is a power. More we know how to deal with it and how to save Israel as democratic and a Jewish state. And yes, I'm very optimist. My grandchildren speak Hebrew, and I'm telling you, we have a wonderful, wonderful country. Come visit, and we need your help there.
Thank you.